The first ring Nolan picked up had a square diamond and a thin platinum band. He held it between two fingers, like it was a bolt he was checking for thread damage, tilted it under the jewelry store lights, then looked at me. "What do you think?" I had spent the last 40 minutes pretending this was normal. The glass cases were too bright. Everything in them looked expensive and permanent. Nolan had already rejected one ring because the setting sat too high, and another because Rebecca would catch it on sweaters. He knew how she pushed her sleeves over her hands when she was cold, how she hated anything fussy, how she wore the same silver earrings most mornings. I knew those things too, because I had heard him talk about her for 3 years. I pointed at the oval stone beside it. "That one." Nolan looked from me to the ring. "Really? Cleaner setting, less flashy. She'll actually wear it." The saleswoman smiled. Nolan grinned. "I knew you'd know." It was such a small sentence. I smiled back anyway. That was the problem with loving your best friend quietly. Nobody had to break your heart on purpose. Sometimes he just had to trust you. While the saleswoman unlocked the case, I put my hands in my coat pockets so nobody could see me rubbing my thumb against my index finger, an old habit whenever I wanted my face to stay neutral. Rebecca Lane was not the villain in this story. I wished, briefly and shamefully, that she were. Instead, Rebecca was kind. She ran community art programs for kids. The first Christmas after we met, she gave me new model-making knives because Nolan had mentioned mine were dull. She remembered I hated cilantro. Once, when I had the flu, she left soup outside my apartment and texted me not to answer the door because she knew I looked terrible. There was no version of reality where hating her made me a better person, so I didn't. I just stood beside Nolan while he bought her an engagement ring. When we stepped outside, Columbus had turned the color of dirty snow. Nolan tucked the navy ring box inside his jacket and patted the pocket twice. "You hungry?" "Always." "Diner?" Of course, the diner. For almost 9 years, Nolan and I had accumulated routines the way other people accumulated furniture. Sunday breakfast at the same booth. Hardware store runs that were never as quick as he promised. His truck whenever we went anywhere together, because he claimed my car sounded like a dishwasher falling downstairs. He unlocked it. I reached automatically for the passenger door, then stopped. Rebecca was meeting us. I opened the rear door instead. Nolan looked over. "What are you doing?" "Getting in." "Why are you back there?" "Rebecca's coming." So she gets shotgun. She doesn't care." "I do." That wasn't true exactly. Or maybe it was true in a way I didn't want to explain. I got in before he could argue. From the back seat I could see the clutter around the console better than usual. My mint gum in the cup holder, the white charging cable I had bought because Nolan's old one barely worked, a folded umbrella under the passenger seat, one of my pens in the door pocket. Evidence of me everywhere, all of it small enough to be mistaken for convenience. Nolan caught my eyes in the mirror. "You're being weird today. You just spent almost $4,000 on a piece of jewelry the size of a cough drop. Maybe I'm processing. 3.8. That changes everything." He smiled, and I hated how easily my body relaxed when he did. At the diner, Rebecca kissed Nolan and slid into the booth beside him. She had bright blue paint on one hand, probably from work. Nolan noticed before she did and rubbed at it with his thumb. I looked down at the menu even though I had ordered the same thing there for 6 years. "How was your mysterious errand?" Rebecca asked. Nolan looked at me. "Painfully boring," I said. "You made me go to 3 stores," he said. "You have commitment issues with jewelry." Rebecca laughed. Nolan kicked my shoe under the table. Casual. Familiar. I thought of the ring box hidden inside his coat. Later, Rebecca mentioned a summer arts fundraiser, and Nolan asked if I would still help build the display walls. "You're better at that stuff than the contractor they gave her." "That's because I do it for a living." So that's a yes. Rebecca gave me an apologetic look. "You can say no. He forgets people have lives." I smiled. "I know." Nolan heard nothing strange in the answer. Why would he? I had been saying yes to him for years. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and stared at an email I had already read 7 times. The subject line said, "Offer of employment." The job was in Minneapolis. Senior fabrication lead. Better salary. More responsibility. A studio that did museum installations and architectural presentation work, instead of the endless luxury condo models I had been producing for 4 years. I had interviewed mostly because my former supervisor sent me the listing with the message, "This was written for you." I hadn't expected an offer. I definitely hadn't expected to want it. 5 weeks until the proposed start date, a relocation stipend, an apartment broker's contact information, a clean exit disguised as professional advancement. My phone buzzed. "Nolan, did you tell her?" I typed, "Tell her what?" He replied, that I spent the afternoon insulting her taste in jewelry. I wrote, "You said the oval one was perfect." He answered, "You said less flashy, same thing." Then another message appeared. "Sunday still good?" There it was. Sunday breakfast. As if nothing had changed. As if Nolan could get engaged, get married, build a house, maybe have children, and I would still be across from him every Sunday at 9:30, with bad coffee and an opinion he hadn't asked for. The worst part was that Nolan probably believed that. Because I had taught him to. I had spent years making myself easy to keep. When Nolan's father had surgery, I drove 3 hours because Nolan said he was fine in the particular tone that meant he absolutely wasn't. When my boyfriend of 8 months broke up with me, I told Nolan it was mutual because he had a certification exam the next morning. When Rebecca first appeared, I smiled, listened, made room. I was good at making room. My mother used to call me her easy kid. My ex called me low maintenance. Nolan called me when he needed someone. All of those things had once sounded like compliments. Lately, they sounded more like instructions. Be useful. Be calm. Don't ask anyone to rearrange themselves for you. If you hurt, do it quietly. I typed, "Sunday's good," then deleted it. Might have plans. I'll let you know. Nolan called before I could put the phone down. "What plans?" I laughed once. "Hello to you too. What are you doing Sunday?" "I don't know yet. You just said you had plans." I said I might. "With who?" "Nolan." "What? You sound like a parole officer." There was a pause. Then, quieter. "We always do Sunday." I leaned back. Minneapolis waited on the screen behind the call window. "I know." Another pause. "Everything okay?" There were a dozen answers available. "No. I helped you choose an engagement ring today and watched your girlfriend hold your hand across a diner table. I've loved you long enough that I know exactly what kind of husband you'll be. I just can't stand close enough to watch you become one." Instead, I said, "Long day." His voice softened. "Yeah, get some sleep." "I will." "And Miles?" "Yeah, you did good today." He meant the ring. Of course he meant the ring. I closed my eyes. "Good night, Nolan." After we hung up, I opened the employment offer again. There was nothing dramatic around me, just the refrigerator humming and a half-dead basil plant on the windowsill. For years, I had told myself staying near Nolan was loyalty. Maybe once it had been. But there was a difference between loving someone and arranging your whole life around the possibility that one day they might need you. I thought about the ring under the jewelry store lights. I thought about Nolan saying, "I knew you'd know." I thought about the passenger seat of his truck, my charger in his console, and my gum in his cup holder. All those tiny signs that I belonged somewhere without ever asking what kind of belonging it was. Then I thought about Minneapolis, where nobody knew which side of a diner booth I usually sat on, where I might have to learn what my life looked like when it wasn't built around being useful to the same person. The acceptance button sat at the bottom of the page. My hand shook once when I moved the cursor. I almost called Nolan. That instinct, more than anything, told me what I had to do. For once, I made the decision, before asking what he needed from it. I clicked accept. I didn't tell Nolan the next day, or the day after that. For the first 48 hours, I told myself I was waiting until the paperwork was finalized. Then the relocation coordinator emailed me a checklist. The apartment broker sent 3 neighborhoods to consider, and my new manager asked whether I preferred a window bench or center work table. The decision stopped feeling theoretical. By Wednesday night, I had flattened 6 cardboard boxes across my living room floor and started sorting my life into categories: keep, donate, throw away. And why have I moved this thing 3 times? Nolan found out because he came over without texting. He knocked once, then used the spare key I had given him years ago. You alive? Debatable. He stepped into the living room holding 2 paper bags from the hardware store and stopped. There were boxes against every wall. My framed prints were already down. A roll of packing tape sat beside my knee. Nolan looked around once, then at me. What happened? I held up a paperback. I discovered I owned 3 copies of The Great Gatsby. Miles. His tone had changed. I put the book into the donation box. What? Why are you packing? I got a job offer. He stared at me. Where? Minneapolis. For a second, he said nothing. Then he laughed once, like he was waiting for me to join him. Minneapolis, Minnesota? No. The secret Minneapolis, outside Cincinnati. Don't do that. Do what? Make a joke, because you know I'm asking a real question. That landed because he knew me too well. It's a fabrication lead position, museum and architectural work, better pay, better projects. When did this happen? The offer came Monday, and you're already packing. I like efficiency. Miles. I exhaled. I accepted. His expression went completely still. When? Monday night. So you accepted a job 600 miles away and didn't tell me? I was going to. When? I don't know. Soon. He set the hardware store bags on the kitchen counter with more force than necessary. Nolan was usually good in emergencies, because emergencies gave him something concrete to do. Shut off the water. Call the contractor. Find the breaker. Feelings without instructions made him restless. How long have you been applying? I applied to 1 job. When? A few weeks ago. Every answer comes with another thing you didn't tell me. That irritated me enough to cut through the guilt. I didn't think I needed permission. His head snapped toward me. I didn't say permission. Then what are you asking for? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Finally he said, a heads up would have been nice. Okay. What do you want me to say? Maybe that moving to another state is something you mention to your best friend before you sign a contract. It was the word contract that told me he understood this was real. If I'd told you before I accepted, what would you have said? That we should talk about it. There, that's why. His eyebrows pulled together. What does that mean? It means I didn't want to talk myself out of it. Why would talking to me do that? I almost answered honestly. Because I have spent years adjusting my life around yours. Instead I said, because you're good at making every problem sound solvable if I stay exactly where I am. Hurt flickered across his face before irritation covered it. That's not fair. No, it probably isn't. Then, Nolan looked down at the hardware store bags. I brought you that stud finder you wanted. Of course he had. A week earlier, I had complained that mine stopped working. He had remembered. Thanks. He shrugged. What are those boxes for? Books. You're putting all your books in those? Yes. They'll split. They are boxes. They're cheap boxes. There are quality hierarchies among cardboard now. There are, if you don't want your books on the sidewalk. He pressed the bottom seam with his thumb. This tape is terrible too. Nolan. What? I can pack my own apartment. I know. He took off his jacket. I'm still helping. That was how the argument ended, not resolved. Redirected into labor. Nolan went back to the hardware store and returned with heavy-duty tape, smaller boxes, bubble wrap, and a black marker thick enough to label shipping containers. For the next 2 hours, we worked mostly in silence. He wrapped my ceramic bowls. I sorted books. He found a cracked coffee mug and held it up. Seriously? It still works. It leaks. Only if you put liquid in it. He looked at me. I took it and put it in the trash. Growth. Proud of you. He smiled despite himself. That was the dangerous part. We could be angry and still fall back into each other with almost no effort. Nolan found an old folded receipt inside a kitchen drawer. It was from a diner near Dayton, dated 7 years earlier. Across the back, in my handwriting, I had drawn an insulting cartoon of him after he tried to repair a hotel air conditioner with a butter knife. You kept that? You put it in my jacket pocket. That does not answer the question. You made my head too big. Anatomically accurate. He folded the receipt again, instead of throwing it away, and placed it carefully on the counter. Years of us lived in useless objects like that. Receipts, chargers, old screws in labeled jars, things too insignificant to preserve on purpose, and somehow preserved anyway. At 9, Nolan ordered pizza without asking what I wanted because he knew. We ate sitting on the floor between boxes. When do you start? 5 weeks. His jaw tightened. That soon? That's what they need. And you found a place? Not yet. They're helping. I could come up with you. Look at apartments. I stared at him. What? You hate apartment hunting. I'll drive. Nolan, you have work. I have vacation days. And Rebecca? What about Rebecca? I didn't answer quickly enough. She'd understand. There it was again. The assumption that there would always be enough of him to divide among everybody, and that none of us would ask what belonged where. You don't have to come. I know. You don't have to help me move either. I know. You keep saying that. Because you keep acting like I'm only here because I think you can't do things yourself. Aren't you? No. His answer came too fast. We both went quiet. Then he said, I just don't like that you're doing all this alone. The anger I had been holding softened despite myself. I've moved before. Not this far. I'll survive. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his paper plate. I know you will. That should have comforted me. Instead, it sounded too much like the role I had always played. Miles will survive. Miles will understand. Miles will still be there. The next Saturday, Nolan picked me up to buy packing supplies I hadn't asked for. When I opened the passenger door, my mint gum, charger, and folded umbrella were still where they always were. I hesitated. Nolan noticed. What? Nothing. I got in. He drove 3 blocks before saying, Rebecca asked if we're still doing dinner next Friday. We? You, me, Rebecca. Her brother might come. I might be busy. With packing? Probably. You can take 1 night off. I have 5 weeks. You keep saying that like someone's chasing you. I turned toward the window. Maybe someone was. Or maybe I was finally chasing something myself. At the store, Nolan argued with an employee about moving blankets while I checked my phone. There was an email from the Minneapolis studio. My employment agreement had been fully processed. Start date confirmed. Relocation stipend approved. Welcome to the team, Miles. I read it twice. When I looked up, Nolan was watching me from the end of the aisle. That was them, wasn't it? Yes. And I hesitated. For the first time since he discovered the boxes, there was no irritation in him. Just dread. I said, everything's finalized. Nolan looked past me at the shelves of tape and rope and plastic bins, then back at me. So you're really going? Not maybe. Not considering it. Not something we could talk through over breakfast. Going. I nodded. Yeah. For once, Nolan had nothing practical to offer. I had never seen that frighten him before. After that, he started acting like 5 weeks was a clerical error he could appeal. The next morning, he texted me at 7:12. Breakfast? I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet open, comparing moving estimates and apartment listings in neighborhoods I had never seen. For 9 years, Sunday breakfast had been automatic. We met at the same diner unless one of us was sick, out of town, or actively bleeding. Even then, Nolan usually tried to reschedule. I stared at his message. Can't today. Apartment calls. His reply came almost immediately. I can bring food. You don't have to. I know. 28 minutes later, he knocked on my door holding 2 coffees and a paper bag. You know, I said, most people interpret can't today as a cancellation. Most people don't forget to eat when they're stressed. I don't forget. You had crackers for dinner Tuesday. How do you know that? You left the box on the counter. That's invasive. That's observational. He walked past me like he still belonged there, set my coffee beside the laptop, then leaned over the listings. Those are expensive. So is Columbus if you want windows. This one has no parking. I'm not taking your truck. I didn't say you were. You were thinking it very loudly. He ignored that and clicked into another listing before I could stop him. It was absurdly normal. Nolan criticizing floor plans. Me telling him exposed brick was not a personality. Him asking how far each place was from the new studio. For 20 minutes, I almost forgot why we were doing it. Then he pointed to the map. That one's 13 minutes from work. By car. So? I might take the bus. Nolan looked at me like I had announced plans to cross Minnesota by sled. You hate buses. I hate one specific bus route. You complain every time you take public transit. I complain every time I drive too. That's true. He took a drink of coffee. Then, casually, you could still turn it down. I closed the laptop. No, I'm just saying, until you actually start. Nolan. What? You have to stop. His face tightened. I'm not trying to control you. I know. Then why do you keep acting like I am? Because every conversation turns into you finding a reason this doesn't have to happen. He looked away. I'm trying to understand it. No, you're trying to make it reversible. He didn't answer. We ate in the living room surrounded by half-filled boxes. When Nolan left, he took the empty coffee cups and 3 bags of trash with him. Practical things. Things he knew how to carry. By the end of the week, my apartment had started losing its shape. Bookshelves stood half empty. The framed print above the couch was wrapped in brown paper. My kitchen echoed because I had packed the things that softened sound. Every evening, I came home and found another reminder that I was moving toward something I had chosen. Nolan came over twice. The first time, he repaired a loose leg on my desk, even though I had already decided to donate it. The second time, he brought color-coded labels. Green for Minneapolis, yellow for storage, red for donate. Why would I need a system this complicated? Because your current system is writing stuff on everything. That was 1 box. There were 3. They contained stuff. He crouched beside a stack of records and started sorting them. I watched him. You know you don't have to make yourself indispensable. His hand stopped. What? Nothing. No. Say it. I sat on the arm of the couch. You keep showing up with tools and tape and labels like if you make this easier, it'll somehow make it less real. That's not what I'm doing. Okay. You don't believe me. I believe you think that. He stared at me, then went back to the records. I'm helping my friend move. There was too much emphasis on friend. I heard it. I wondered if he did. The following Wednesday, Caleb Ortiz leaned over my work table while I was trimming acrylic panels for a museum model. So Minneapolis is official? Very. He whistled. Cold. I've been warned. My college roommate lives there. You've told me. I have? Twice. Then clearly you're not appreciating the resource. Caleb was 34, recently divorced, funny in an exhausted way, and incapable of having a conversation without turning half of it into a complaint about project managers. He pulled out his phone. I'm sending you his number. He knows everybody. Bars, restaurants, neighborhoods. He can make sure you don't accidentally move next door to a drum circle. An important service. And I'll probably be up there in October anyway. I looked at him. Why? Conference. You hate conferences. I also hate being employed, but apparently I keep doing that. I laughed. That was when Nolan walked into the studio. He was there because he had borrowed my laser level 2 months earlier and had apparently decided returning it during business hours was urgent. He saw Caleb standing beside me, saw my phone in Caleb's hand as he entered his roommate's number, and slowed down. "Hey," I said. "Hey." Caleb glanced between us. "You must be Nolan." Nolan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "How do you know who I am?" Caleb smiled. "Miles talks about you." I wanted the floor to open. "Rarely," I said. "Constantly," Caleb said. "Go back to work." "Bossy." Caleb walked away laughing. Nolan placed the laser level on my table. "So, that's Caleb." I looked at him. "You say that, like he's been indicted. You've mentioned him." "Have I?" "Apparently." I turned back to the acrylic panel. Nolan didn't leave. After a few seconds, he asked, "He moving to Minneapolis too?" I nearly cut the wrong edge. "No. He said he'll be there in October. For a conference." "How long?" "I don't know." "You too close?" That made me look up. "What is happening right now?" "Nothing. You returned a tool in the middle of your workday, and now you're interviewing me about a coworker." "I'm not interviewing you. What do you call it?" "Conversation." "You're very bad at conversation." Nolan crossed his arms. "Forget it." I should have let him. Instead I said, "Caleb offered to show me around when he's there, that's all." Nolan's jaw shifted. "He doesn't even live there." "No, but his old roommate does. So some guy you don't know is showing you around?" "Possibly." "That sounds safe." I stared at him. "I'm 32. I know how old you are." "Then stop acting like I'm transferring colleges." "I'm not. You're doing a convincing impression." His eyes dropped to my hands. "You don't know anybody there." "I will." The words came out softer than I intended. What seemed to bother him more. Nolan left 2 minutes later. That evening, he texted me a list of Minneapolis neighborhoods ranked by commute time, parking availability, and crime statistics. I didn't ask where he got any of it. I also didn't tell him Caleb's friend had already sent me almost the same list. The next Sunday, I skipped breakfast again. This time Nolan didn't show up. At 9:30, I found myself listening for his knock anyway. At 9:40, I made coffee. At 10, I checked my phone. Nothing. The relief I had expected never came. Instead, the apartment felt too quiet. I hated that. Choosing myself was supposed to feel cleaner than this. I spent the morning packing the hall closet. At the bottom, I found Nolan's old Ohio State sweatshirt, the gray one he claimed I had stolen years ago. I sat on the floor holding it for almost a minute. Then I folded it and put it in a box marked Nolan. "Monday afternoon," he texted. "Dinner? Busy. Tuesday. Hardware store? I have enough boxes. Wednesday. You still have my drill bits? Top cabinet in your garage. Thursday. Nothing." By Friday, our friendship had been reduced to unanswered invitations and the logistical exchange of possessions. I told myself that was necessary. Then Nolan appeared outside my office at 6. He was leaning against his truck with his hands in his jacket pockets. I walked toward him slowly. "What are you doing here?" "Taking you home. I have a car. You left it at the mechanic this morning." I stopped. I had mentioned that 3 days earlier. "You remembered." Of course I remembered. He opened the passenger door. My charger was still plugged in. The mint gum was still in the cup holder. I got in. For the first several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Nolan said, "Rebecca asked if I'm mad at you." "Are you?" "I don't know. That sounds healthy." He ignored that. "You don't call anymore. You can call me." "I do." And I answer. "Not the same." Streetlights moved across his face as we drove. He kept both hands on the wheel. "You stopped breakfast." "I've been busy." "You stopped coming by." "I'm packing." "You gave me back my sweatshirt." I looked at him. "That thing has been in my closet for 6 years." "I know. So?" So you never cared before? There was a roughness in his voice that made me stop looking for jokes. He pulled up in front of my building, but didn't unlock the doors. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he looked at the entrance, not at me. Why does it feel like you're already gone? I had spent years giving him answers that made things easier. That night, I couldn't find one. You know you can let me out, I said. His hand moved toward the lock button, but didn't press it. That's not an answer. I didn't know it was a question. You know exactly what I'm asking. I did. For years, Nolan had accepted the version of me that was always within reach. Sunday breakfast, emergency rides, a spare key, someone to call when work went badly, or his father stopped answering messages, or Rebecca wanted an opinion he didn't know how to give. I had never made him examine the arrangement, because examining it would have required me to admit I wanted more from it. Now I was leaving, and apparently absence had made me visible in a way, and presence never had. I'm trying to make this easier, I said. For who? For me. His expression changed. That answer hurt him. What did I do? Nothing. Then stop saying things like that. Like what? Like being around me is something you need to recover from. Nolan. No, I'm serious. You take a job 600 miles away. You stop breakfast. You barely answer me. You're returning things you've had longer than some of my furniture. And every time I ask why, you act like I'm unreasonable for noticing. I never said you were unreasonable. You make me feel unreasonable. That's different. How? Because I don't have a good answer that won't make things worse. He finally turned toward me. Try me. I laughed under my breath. Not because anything was funny. Not. You really don't want me to. You don't get to decide that. Something in me sharpened. And you don't get to decide you're entitled to every part of this, just because we've known each other 9 years. His face went still. I didn't say I was entitled. You keep asking like there has to be a version of my decision that makes sense to you. Because none of this makes sense. It makes perfect sense. To you. Yes, that's my point. He looked away, breathing hard through his nose. A car passed behind us, headlights briefly filling the truck. Then Nolan said, "Is this because of Rebecca?" There it was. The question I had been hoping he would never ask because there was no harmless way to answer it. No. He looked back at me immediately. That was fast. Because Rebecca hasn't done anything wrong. I didn't say she did. Then don't make her the explanation. I'm trying to understand why you suddenly can't stand being around me. I can stand being around you. Could have fooled me. That isn't what's happening. Then what is? I reached for the door handle, still locked. Nolan. What? Unlock the door. He stared at me for a second, then pressed the button. The locks clicked. I could have left. Instead, I kept my hand on the handle and said, "You asked why it feels like I'm already gone." He waited. Because I'm trying to practice. His forehead creased. Practice what? Not building every week around you. He went very quiet. I continued before I could stop myself. Not assuming Sunday belongs to us. Not keeping evenings open because you might call. Not being the person you ask first, when Rebecca doesn't know which paint color to choose, or your truck makes a noise, or you're pissed at your boss. That's friendship. I know. Then why are you saying it like it's bad? Because it isn't bad. My voice cracked just enough to embarrass me. That's what makes it hard. Nolan didn't move. Finally, he said, "Why is it so easy for you to imagine a life where I'm not there?" I looked at him. There was actual fear in his face. Not anger, not confusion. Fear. "It isn't," I said. "That's the problem." Silence filled the truck. Nolan's mouth opened, then closed. I pushed the door open. "Miles." I stopped. His voice was different now. Careful. "What does that mean?" "You know what it means." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do." "I need you to say it." I turned back toward him. For almost 9 years, Nolan had been the person I could say almost anything to. I had told him when my mother's second marriage was failing, before she told anyone else. I had told him I hated my old job. I had told him when a boyfriend called me emotionally unavailable and how much that scared me because I suspected he was right. This was the one truth I had protected from him, maybe protected us from. I can't keep building my life around what you might need from me. His face tightened. I never asked you to do that. I know. Then why did you? Because I loved you. The words rose so quickly I almost said them. Instead, I looked through the windshield. When did you decide Minneapolis? He asked. I told you. No. I mean, when did you decide you had to leave? I swallowed. The jewelry store. He went completely still. I regretted it immediately. Miles. Don't. The ring? I said don't. Why? I got out of the truck. He followed. Of course he did. The air was cold enough to sting. I walked toward my building, but Nolan caught up before I reached the steps. He didn't touch me. He just moved in front of me. Why did helping me pick a ring make you decide to leave? Because it did. That's not enough. It has to be. Not anymore. I stared at him. Not anymore? You've spent 3 weeks acting like I'm supposed to understand something you refuse to tell me. I've spent years making sure you never had to. The second it left my mouth, I knew I had gone too far. Nolan heard it too. His expression changed slowly. Years? I said nothing. He looked at me like he was rearranging old memories in real time. Sunday mornings, road trips, breakups, Rebecca. The passenger seat. All the things that had meant one thing to him and maybe something else to me. Oh, he said. I hated that word. Not because it was cruel, because it was understanding arriving too late. I stepped around him. Miles, wait. I don't want to do this in a parking lot. Then let's go upstairs. No. Why not? Because you have a girlfriend. That stopped him. I turned. You have a girlfriend you were planning to propose to. A good girlfriend. A person who thinks you spent an afternoon running boring errands when you were buying her a ring. I am not going upstairs with you at midnight to have some emotional conversation behind her back. I'm not asking you to do anything. Yes, you are. You just don't know what. His face went pale. Are you in love with me? There was no accusation in it. That almost made it worse. I could have lied. I had years of practice. I had lied by omission at Christmas dinners and hospital waiting rooms and weekend trips. I had lied every time someone assumed my silence meant there was nothing to say. I was tired, so I nodded. Yes. Nolan stared at me. I have been for a long time. How long? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. Why? Because I didn't know. Exactly. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means you didn't know, because I didn't want you to know. Why? I almost laughed. Because you're straight, Nolan. He flinched. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. You're with Rebecca. You love her. You were going to ask her to marry you. What exactly was I supposed to do? Make a speech? Tell you I've spent years wanting something from you that you never offered? He looked like I had hit him. That's not fair. No, it isn't fair. None of it is. But I'm not blaming you. It feels like you are. I'm not. Then why are you leaving? Because staying hurts. The words came out quieter than everything before them. Nolan stopped arguing. I looked at the pavement between us. I don't want you to choose me. His head lifted. I'm not asking for that. I am not telling you this because I want you to break up with Rebecca. I'm not waiting for some movie moment where you suddenly realize you've secretly loved me all along. I'm telling you because you asked why I have to go. I looked at him. This is why. His face had gone blank in the way it did when something overwhelmed him. I knew that expression. I had seen it outside his father's hospital room, at his mother's funeral. On the day Rebecca told him she was ready to talk seriously about marriage, Nolan could handle pain as long as it arrived with instructions. There were no instructions for this. He rubbed both hands over his face. I need time. There it was. A sentence I had expected for years and still wasn't prepared to hear. I nodded. Okay. Miles, I'm not saying you don't have to explain. I want to. Not tonight. He looked at me helplessly. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. For once, I didn't rescue him from the silence. That's okay. I walked to the front door. He stayed by the truck. Before I went inside, he called my name. I looked back. He seemed like he wanted to come after me. He didn't. I opened the door, stepped into the lobby, and let it close between us. For years, I had believed that if Nolan ever saw the complicated part of me, the part that wanted something he couldn't easily give, he would need distance. Now he finally knew, and the first thing he had asked for was time. For the next 9 days, Nolan and I became extremely polite. Politeness was worse than anger. He texted when he needed to know whether I still wanted the folding table stored in his garage. I answered yes. I asked whether he had found the drill bits I mentioned. He replied with a picture of them on his workbench. When he came by for the last box of tools he had left at my apartment, he stood just inside the door and didn't take off his jacket. We talked about weather, traffic, and whether the moving company could handle my drafting table without taking it apart. Nothing important. Nothing dangerous. He never mentioned the parking lot. I never mentioned that I had spent every night afterward replaying the moment he said he needed time, wondering how many different ways a person could hear the same sentence and still hope it meant something other than distance. My apartment kept emptying around me. The couch went to a graduate student from Worthington. I donated 2 lamps, 3 boxes of books, and the desk Nolan had repaired, even though I told him not to. The bare floors made footsteps sound unfamiliar. At work, Caleb asked twice if I was okay and accepted moving stress the second time without making me lie harder. I booked the moving truck. I signed the lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in Minneapolis, with windows facing an alley and enough space near the kitchen for a workbench. Every practical decision made leaving more real. That helped. Practical things had edges, measurements, dates, receipts. They didn't ask you what you wanted from a man who had never promised to want you back. Nolan, meanwhile, went home every night to Rebecca. I knew that because I knew his life. That knowledge had once felt intimate. Now it felt intrusive, even when I did nothing with it. Rebecca called me on a Thursday afternoon. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Hey," I said. "Hey, are you busy? I can talk." There was a pause. "Nolan says you're leaving next week." "Yeah." "He said the job's good." "It is." Another pause. Then she said, "Did something happen between you two?" I closed my eyes. "Rebecca, I'm not asking for details you don't want to give me." Her voice was calm, but not casual. "He's been somewhere else for almost 2 weeks. He goes quiet in the middle of conversations. He drove past our exit yesterday because he was staring at nothing. I'm sorry. Don't apologize yet. I don't know what I'm asking. Neither did I. That was probably why I told the truth carefully. I think Nolan has some things he needs to figure out. About you?" I didn't answer. Rebecca exhaled softly. "Okay, Rebecca, I'm not trying to. I know. You don't know. I know you." That hurt more than if she had accused me. "And I know him," she continued. "If you were trying to take something from me, you wouldn't be moving 600 miles away." I sat down on the edge of a packing box. "I never wanted to hurt you. I believe you." We were quiet. Then she said, "I need him to stop protecting me from whatever truth he thinks I can't handle." I had no answer for that. Rebecca found one herself. "I'll talk to him." They talked that night. I learned the details later. Rebecca was making pasta when Nolan came home. She turned off the burner, sat across from him at the kitchen table, and asked whether he wanted to marry her. He said yes too quickly. Rebecca stared at him for a long time. "That isn't what I asked." Nolan tried again. He told her he loved her. She said she knew. Then she asked, "Do you want to marry me, or do you want to be the kind of man who is ready to marry me?" That was the question that broke through him. Not because the answer was simple, because it wasn't. 3 years of dinners and holidays and shared plans, did not become false because Nolan had discovered something frightening about himself. He cared about Rebecca. He had imagined a future with her because the future made sense. House, marriage, maybe children, a life he could explain without pausing. But when she asked whether he wanted that life specifically, not whether he should want it, he couldn't say yes. Rebecca did not scream. She cried. So did Nolan. He told her there was something about me he had never understood. She asked whether anything had happened between us. He said no. She believed him. Then she asked whether he wished something had. Nolan couldn't answer. That was enough. They ended 3 years together at the same kitchen table where they had once discussed wedding venues. There was no villain, just two people discovering that kindness could not turn uncertainty into a promise. Nolan didn't call me afterward. I was grateful. I think 2 days passed before I saw him again. He had agreed to meet me at his garage because I still had a box of winter clothes and an old toolbox stored there. When I arrived, he was already outside with the garage door open. He looked terrible. Not movie terrible. Real terrible. Unshaven. Tired eyes. Same jacket 2 days in a row, unless he happened to own 2 identical ones. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He carried the winter box to my car. I took the toolbox myself. Neither of us mentioned Rebecca until I closed the trunk. Then Nolan said, "We broke up." I looked at him. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "She called you." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "What did you tell her?" "The truth without details." He almost smiled. "That sounds like you. That sounds like you." "I didn't tell her how you felt. I don't know how you feel." His expression changed. Neither of us moved. Finally, Nolan said, "Neither do I." A week earlier, that answer would have cut me open. Now I was too tired. "I hope you figure it out." He looked startled by how calmly I said it. "Miles, I mean that. You're leaving in 3 days." "I know." "So that's it?" I stared at him. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." "Then we're back where we were." "No." His voice sharpened. "No, we're not." I waited. He looked frustrated with himself. "I ended things with Rebecca." My stomach dropped. "Don't say that like it was for me." It wasn't. "Good. That doesn't mean you had nothing to do with me finally looking at what I was doing. That still doesn't make me responsible for what happens next." "I know." For the first time, I believed he might actually mean it. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I'm trying not to ask you for something I haven't earned." The sentence almost undid me. Almost. I nodded toward my car. I should go. Nolan looked like he wanted to stop me. He didn't. That mattered too. That evening, Nolan sat alone in his truck outside the apartment he had shared with Rebecca. He told me later that he reached toward the passenger seat without thinking. For years, there had always been something of mine there. The mint gum, the white charging cable, the umbrella, a receipt stuffed into the door pocket, my gloves one winter, a pair of sunglasses I kept forgetting to take home, but sometime during those quiet weeks, I had taken everything back. The charger was gone. The cup holder was empty. The door pocket held nothing but Nolan's insurance card. The passenger seat looked clean for the first time in years. He sat there staring at it and finally understood something he had been avoiding. He wasn't afraid I would move away and find someone else. That was part of it, but not the center. He was afraid I would build a life that no longer contained him, and underneath that fear was a harder truth. For years, Nolan had assumed there would always be a place for him in my life, without ever asking what place he was willing to give me in his. The morning before my move, I woke at 5:30, to the sound of rain against the bedroom window. Almost everything I owned was packed. The mattress was on the floor. My keys were on the counter. At 7, the movers would arrive. At noon, I would hand over the apartment. The next morning, I would drive north. My phone stayed silent. For once, I didn't check it. Nolan knocked at 6:23. I knew the time, Because I was standing in my kitchen staring at the microwave clock, drinking coffee from the only mug I hadn't packed. When I opened the door, he was soaked through the shoulders. "You're early," I said. "I know. The movers aren't here until 7. I'm not here for the movers." That stopped me. He looked exhausted, but different from the last time I saw him. Not calmer exactly, more decided. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked into the nearly empty living room and stood where the couch used to be. For once, he didn't look for something to carry. "I need to tell you a few things," he said, "and I need you to let me finish before you make it easier for me." Despite everything, I almost smiled. "That sounds rehearsed." "It is." "Okay." He took a breath. "Rebecca and I are done. Not because you asked me to leave her. You didn't. Not because I think ending that relationship automatically means I get to start something with you. I don't." I folded my arms. She deserved an answer I couldn't give her. That was true before I understood why. You just forced me to stop pretending uncertainty was the same thing as commitment. I looked down. "How is she?" "Hurt." His voice roughened. "So am I. We were good to each other." "That doesn't disappear because it ended." I nodded. "I'm sorry." "I know." He rubbed his palms against his jeans. I also called the counseling number through work. I looked up. Nolan gave a humorless laugh. Apparently, commercial building inspectors are allowed to have feelings. That policy must be new. Very recent. He smiled briefly. I had one appointment. Mostly I talked in circles, but I'm going back. Something in my chest shifted. He wasn't standing there asking me to explain him to himself. That mattered. "I don't have a perfect label for this yet," he said. "Maybe I'm bi. Maybe I should have figured that out years ago. Maybe I'm going to spend the next 6 months realizing how many things I called friendship, because that word didn't scare me." His eyes stayed on mine. "But I know I want you." The room went completely quiet. I had imagined hearing something like that so many times that the real sentence felt almost too plain. Nolan took one step closer, then stopped. "I don't mean I want you to stay." I swallowed. "You don't?" "No." The word hurt before he finished. "I mean, I do. Of course I do. I want you 10 minutes away. I want Sunday breakfast. I want your stupid mug in my cabinet and your charger in my truck. But that's what I want. Minneapolis is what you chose." I looked at him. "And I'm done asking you to make your life smaller so mine feels normal." My throat tightened. "Nolan." "No. Let me finish." I nodded. He took another breath. "You finally told me what you needed, and I got scared." "Exactly. I know." He didn't defend himself. That was almost harder to hear than an apology. I asked for time, because everything I thought I understood about myself moved at once. "But you heard it as me backing away the second you became complicated." I stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I know you." He said it without triumph. Maybe not as well as I thought, but enough. I looked toward the boxes. For years, I thought if I wanted too much from someone, eventually they'd decide I was work. Nolan's face softened. "And I let you do all the work. That's not entirely fair." "It's fair enough." He stepped closer, still leaving space between us. "I'm not asking you to stay. If Minneapolis is what you want, go. I'll carry every box downstairs myself if I have to. You'd complain about my packing." "Your packing is terrible." I laughed, and the sound broke something open. Nolan's eyes went bright. Then he said, very quietly, "Just don't leave, because you think loving you is something I can't choose." I had no answer ready. For once, that felt honest. I sat on the edge of a box marked kitchen and covered my face with both hands. Nolan waited. He didn't touch me until I lowered them. Then he asked, "Can I sit?" I nodded. He sat beside me, our shoulders almost touching. "What happens now?" I asked. "I was hoping you'd know." "No." "Damn." I looked at him. "I still have to go." "I know. And I'm not doing some undefined thing where you call me every night until you decide this was a crisis response." "Fair. And if you decide you only want friendship, You have to tell me before I build a relationship out of guesses. Fair. And you don't get to be jealous of every man in Minneapolis. He frowned. I wasn't jealous of Caleb. I stared at him. Okay, that one was a lie. Good start. His hand rested palm up on the box between us, not reaching, waiting. I looked at it for several seconds before placing my hand in his. It was such a small thing after 9 years of casual contact. We had hugged, slept shoulder to shoulder on flights, shoved each other out of doorways, passed tools hand to hand 1,000 times. This felt different because neither of us could pretend it was accidental. Nolan laced his fingers carefully through mine. Can I kiss you? My eyes burned. You really are trying this honesty thing. It's terrible. Yes. Can I? I nodded. The kiss was brief and nervous, and nothing like the dramatic version I had once imagined. Nolan bumped my nose. I laughed into his mouth. He pulled back, embarrassed. Don't. What? Laugh. I'm not laughing at you. You absolutely are. I've waited years for this. I'm allowed notes. He shook his head, smiling. Then the movers knocked. Nolan helped me leave Columbus. That mattered more than if he had tried to stop me. He carried boxes down 3 flights of stairs, argued with the movers about my drafting table, and taped one carton I had apparently failed to close on the bottom. At noon, I handed over my apartment keys. The next morning, Nolan drove behind me for the first 2 hours north before we pulled into a rest stop. You don't have to follow me to Minnesota, I told him. I know. There it was again. Only this time, I understood the difference. He wasn't helping because he thought I couldn't go without him. He was helping because he wanted to go as far as I would let him. Long distance was not romantic in the way movies promised. Mostly, it was calendars, missed calls, airline prices, weather delays. Nolan learning that when I complained about my new supervisor, I did not necessarily want a 6-step plan for handling him. Me learning that when Nolan went quiet after therapy, silence did not automatically mean regret. We overscheduled ourselves at first. Every night became a call because neither of us knew what enough contact looked like. Then one Tuesday, Nolan texted me that he was exhausted and going to bed early. I stared at the message for 5 minutes and managed to answer, "Sleep well," instead of asking whether anything was wrong. The next morning, he called me while brushing his teeth. Why are you proud of yourself? I'm not. You sound proud. I demonstrated emotional maturity. Terrifying. You should be grateful. I'm hanging up. You called me. I regret it. I stood in my new kitchen smiling at nothing for several minutes after the call ended. 3 weeks after I moved, Nolan came to Minneapolis. Our first actual date was ridiculous. We had known each other almost 9 years and still spent 20 minutes deciding whether we were supposed to meet at the restaurant or arrive together. Nolan showed up wearing a dark blue shirt I had never seen. I stared at his sleeve. You bought a date shirt? No. You still have the tag string on the cuff. He looked down. Shut up. I laughed so hard the hostess smiled at us. Dinner was stranger than the kiss had been. We knew everything about each other, except how to behave when the thing between us was allowed to have a name. Nolan reached across the table once and stopped halfway, then deliberately put his hand over mine. I looked at him. What? Practicing. Public hand contact? Apparently. You're very brave. Thank you. We walked back to my apartment afterward. At the entrance, Nolan looked at me and asked, "Can I come up?" The question mattered. So did the fact that I could answer honestly. Yes. Months passed. Sunday breakfast became Sunday video calls when we were apart, and whatever diner we could find when we were together. Nolan kept going to therapy. He eventually told his father he was seeing me. His father was silent long enough that Nolan nearly hung up. Then he asked whether I was still driving the terrible car. That was not everything Nolan had needed to hear. But it was enough for one conversation. Rebecca and I exchanged a few messages. Not immediately. We both needed distance. Months later, she sent me a photograph from one of her community art programs. A group of kids stood beside display walls I had helped design the year before. "Still standing," she wrote. I replied, "Miracle." She sent back, "Don't get arrogant." There was relief in being able to laugh with her without pretending nothing painful had happened. I built a life in Minneapolis that did not depend on Nolan arriving. That part mattered. I learned the studio. I learned which grocery store was worth driving farther for. I made friends. Caleb's old roommate did show me around, and despite Nolan's suspicious questions, he turned out to be happily married to a woman named Rachel and mostly interested in arguing about hockey. I stopped measuring every good week by how often Nolan called. I stopped interpreting independence as proof I cared less. Nolan learned something too. Showing up did not always mean arriving uninvited with a toolbox. Sometimes it meant asking first. Sometimes it meant hearing no and not turning it into rejection. 7 months after I moved, he called me on a Wednesday evening. I got an email from work. That sounds ominous. There's an opening. Promotion? Sort of. Regional inspection position. Where? He paused. Minneapolis. I sat down. You applied? No. That surprised me. Not yet. Why not? Because I wanted to talk to you first. The old version of us would have decided separately and announced afterward. This time, we talked. Really talked. About money. Work. Whether Nolan actually wanted the position or just wanted the distance between us gone. Whether moving would make him resentful. Whether I was ready to share more of my daily life after finally learning how to own it. We talked about Rebecca, who had started seeing someone else and was doing well. We talked about what would happen if Nolan moved, and we eventually discovered that being in love did not automatically make us good at living together. For once, uncertainty did not frighten either of us enough to avoid the conversation. 2 weeks later, Nolan applied. He got the job. 3 months after that, I stood outside my apartment while his truck turned onto my street packed with boxes. He parked at the curb and leaned across to open the passenger door. I walked toward him, then stopped. My white charging cable was plugged into the console. Mint gum sat in the cup holder. The folded umbrella was under the seat. I looked at him. You kept all that? He shrugged. Apparently I'm sentimental. You're a hoarder. Get in. I did. Not because that seat proved I belonged to him. Not because I had waited long enough to earn it. Not because staying close to Nolan had finally been rewarded. I got in because this time, we had both chosen where we were going. For years, I thought love meant being easy to keep. Nolan taught me something harder and better. The right person doesn't need you to disappear inside their life before they can make room for you.